for the next part about ellipses, we need to learn how to graph an ellipse. Before we get too in-depth in graphing an ellipse, there is another point that we need to review about the standard form of an ellipse. If you recall back in circles, we could also have a center point at H and K, and of course that would shift the ellipse or the circle or any figure that we're working with left and right and up and down, and based off of whether it's inside of parentheses or outside of parentheses. Keep in mind that if it's 0, 0, then it's just x squared over a squared plus y squared over b squared, and we're always going to try to make it equal to 1. And of course, if we're dealing with a vertical axis, the a squared and the b squared will change places. So if we look at example number 1, they're going to ask us to draw the ellipse. Now notice they didn't ask us to graph it, but simply to draw it. We graph functions, we draw conic sections, and that's just really a little bit of a mathematical technicality. But if you notice, the first thing here is we need to put this in standard form. Put in standard form. So if you see that it's not equal to 1 and that it's not written in a fractional form in most cases, that it's probably not in standard form for an ellipse. So we need to go ahead and convert that to standard form. Now, keep in mind, it asks us to do a whole slew of things here. It wants us to identify the focus, the center, the vertices, the co-vertices, and the length of the major and minor axis. So we'll talk about the easy way to do all of those and find out what each one of those are. I will probably not spend too much time on the focus or the foci. I'll be more concerned about your vertices and co-vertices and drawing the ellipse appropriately. But let's take a look at how we're going to do this. First thing we're going to do is write it in standard form. So we need to divide everything by 144 so that we get that equal to 1. When we do that, you can see that we have x squared over 16 plus y squared over 9. Now, this is a very important part of this process. Because the larger value is underneath the x, that tells me that my major axis is going to be horizontal. Keep in mind, that value represents a squared, so that if a squared equals 16, a has to equal to 4. Okay, and then of course, that means that this 9 represents b squared, so b squared equals 9 and b equals 3, and so that's going to represent my co-vertices. So I'm going to really just focus on the vertices and the co-vertices here. Once I have a is equal to 4 and b is equal to 3, I also know that since there is no h and k value here, that my center must be at 0, 0. And so then I can simply, from that center point, count 4 along the x-axis. And then for my minor, I can count up and down the y-axis. And I can create the points for my ellipse. Now, to draw this ellipse, really just simply want you to do the best you can of putting these 4 points together. Similar to what we did in the circle, we're just going to do the best we can to draw our ellipse, but we're also going to make sure that we label the points for the co-vertices and the vertices. Now, in this particular case, I'm not going to worry about the foci, but you can see here that we're using the c squared equals a squared minus b squared to find that. Now, it asks us one other thing. It asks us to find the length of the major and the minor axis. And of course, the length of the major axis is always 2 times a, and we know that a is equal to 4. And so that's for the major axis. And then 2 times b is going to get us our minor axis. And you can see here that the major axis is 2 times 4, which is 8 units. And the minor axis is 2 times 3, which is 6 units. So that's the basics of identifying all these parts and then simply drawing the ellipse by connecting the 4 points that we were able to come up with. So very similar to graphing a circle, except you have to identify a handful more parts. Now, let's take a look at sample for you to work on. So let's go down here to sample number 1. So go ahead and draw the ellipse. 4x squared plus 25y squared equals 100. I'm going to ask you to simply concentrate on the center, the focus, and the length of those. We'll worry about the foci at another point. So go ahead and try that now. Okay. So you can see here that we start off with a situation where we're not in standard form for an ellipse. And so the first thing I'll need to do is divide everything by 100. And the reason I'm choosing 100 is because my first goal is to get this whole thing equal to 1. Now, when we do that, we can reduce 4 over 100. And so that's going to end up being 25. And then, of course, it's the opposite on the other one. That ends up being 4. And now I have a standard form equation of an ellipse. Now, again, I can see that my larger value is underneath the x squared, so I know that it's going to be horizontal in nature. So that's going to help me know whether my answer is going to be correct or not. So that 25 has to represent a squared, so a is going to equal to 5, which means that since this is x squared and y squared, I have no shifting. That's just at 0, 0. That's my center point. And I can simply go out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on each direction of the x-axis. And then, of course, the 4 represents b squared. So b will equal to 2. And since that's going to be underneath the y, it's going to be on the y-axis, 2 up and 2 down. And then, of course, I'm going to do the best I can to simply connect those parts. And, of course, I would want to label all of my points for my ellipse. And that is basically it. That's a simple way to draw an ellipse and identify the various parts that are necessary. So make sure you get plenty of practice doing that for the quiz.